Hello and welcome to today's debate exploring the possibilities of using stem cell therapies for treating COVID-19 patients. The novel coronavirus, as we know, has only in a matter of weeks turned life upside down for most of the world. Whole countries are in lockdown. More than 2 million people have fallen ill. Tens of thousands have died. Billions are having to stay at home to slow the spread of the virus. The economic consequences are enormous. There is currently no vaccine and no proven cure for COVID-19, making a full return to regular life impossible. The scientific community and research institutions are investing extensive resources in the development of both. More than 60 drugs and 20 vaccines are currently being developed. And as we will hear from today's panel, stem cell therapies may unlock one of the ways to effectively treat people falling ill with the novel coronavirus. Joining us today for this debate, hosted by the Slovenian Press Agency, in cooperation with its partners, are 4 professionals in the area of stem cell therapies. So today with us, Dr. Miomir Knežević, CEO of Slovenian biotech company Educell. Also joining us, Professor Dr. Tamara Turnšek, advisor to the director of the Slovenian National Institute of Biology. Joining us, Dr. Francesco Curcio, professor of clinical pathology at the University of Udine in Italy and director of the Department of Laboratory Medicine at the University Medical Center of Udine in Italy. And also with us, Dr. B.N. Manohar, who is the CEO of biotech company Therapeutics India. Our panel is here to answer some of the fundamental questions about stem cell therapy and how it can be used in treating COVID-19 patients. This is a debate that has been designed for science and health journalists, and we will open up the debate to them for any questions. So if you wish to participate, please address the questions to the following email address. It's staklub, staklub @sta.si, and state your name and organization in the process. So to open up the debate, Professor Dr. Turnšek, you have dedicated a significant part of your career studying immune system response. We have heard the details of the symptoms of COVID-19, ranging from the mild, the fever, the cough, and also to the severe. So when people actually start to have trouble breathing and need ventilation. What is happening, if you can explain, in the body of patients in these severest cases? And why is there such a difference between the patients who have maybe some of those who have no symptoms and those who have mild symptoms, and obviously those who have really serious symptoms? What is going on there?
I have to say that we at the National Institute of Biology are researching the mesenchymal stem cells for over 15 years. And so we have seen their potential in modulating many processes. We are working mostly on cancer, but also on inflammation, which in fact is also in some cases related to cancer. So what is happening after viral infection? Viruses, especially the Sark viruses, have a huge genome, and this is composed of ribonucleic acid RNAs and a bunch of proteins that are composed, making a virus, are entering the epithelial cells, the permissive cells. Not all cells are permissive, but some cells are permissive, and these are cells of immune system, of epithelial system, and these cells have special receptors. And as you probably know, the images of this coronavirus with these spikes that are all over the surface, there are the proteins that are attached to the cell surface of the infected cells. And there is a receptor called IC2 in this particular case. And this receptor then interacts with other proteases and proteins so that to allow very fast entrance of COVID-2 into the cells. This is faster than with other cells, with other viruses. So that's why this virus is so infectious. But then this is still okay. And when the virus would come in, would use the apparatus of the cell to produce their own proteins and actually to replicate. The trick here is the second phase. And here the mesenchymal stem cells come into place. Namely, this virus stops the producing of an important molecule cytokine called interferon gamma. And this protein is actually a protein that these cells that are attacked by virus would call for help for immune systems. And in this case, this immune system don't come for a long time. So a lot of viruses can be produced and can, of course, then damage the cells. But after finally interferon gamma is upregulated, the cells come in of the immune cells like monocytes, macrophages, T cells, and NK cells, so natural killer cells, for example, in huge amounts, and they start to produce various other cytokines, and this is what we call a cytokine storm. And this storm is huge inflammatory, causes acute inflammation, huge inflammatory interactions, activation, and this induces molecules that can actually damage the cell. And when the lung cell is damaged, lung tissue is damaged, there's no respiration anymore, and patients can die. So this is the second phase. And in mesenchymal stem cell here are to depress, to immunosuppress these interactions. They come also, but they're not effective enough. So if they are not able to tame the cytokine storm, then we have a problem. But in some patients, they can. In some patients, these interactions are so mild that maybe patients even don't feel anything wrong. And in some patients, it's terrible. Mesenchymal stem cells cannot do it. And maybe this is the reason why some patients really respond, die, and some others don't.
Thank you for that explanation. If I can follow it up immediately, what is understood about the differences in the response from those patients that don't show any symptoms or mild symptoms and those that actually show much more severe symptoms?
Well, there are two options. First, as I said, that the cells are not so permissive from some patients for some reasons. The second is that really there is an immune system that is supposed to react, that in some patients, especially older patients, is absolutely lower. Also, mesenchymal stem cells, which represent the regenerative potential of the body, which is also deteriorating with age. It's weakened, and they cannot produce so much immunosuppressant cytokines that would really reduce the acute inflammation, cannot stop it anymore. And this is in older patients. So that's why older patients would really be in troubles, and we need to help them, getting them more infusion, so to say, or actually transfusion of the mesenchymal stem cells that would be a natural healing cells.
Dr. Knežević, your company has worked on cell treatments for more than 20 years. Specifically, it has been developing stem cell therapies to treat various ailments. Can I ask you for a brief introduction to stem cells and what potential they provide for treatment of autoimmune disorders, of the sort of the wrong reaction of the autoimmune system? As we heard, it is one of the reasons that you have serious patients with COVID.
Hello, thank you very much. As you mentioned, stem cell therapy is not a new new one. And also the name stem cells was a lot of times misused or wrongly used and so on. But the main thing is that what we are when we talk about stem cell therapies, we mean that these are the cells which have a regenerative potential. So that's a broad spectrum of different cells which can not only, let's say, close the wound or let's say prevent some damage, but they are also regenerating. So it means inducing that the tissue which is was damaged is also replaced by the new tissue. And that's a story that's like renewing the whole body. And different tissues in our body are differently regenerating. Let's say epithelia or epidermis on the skin, they are changing in a few days. You have a total replacement. And on the other hand, let's say our skeleton is replaced in 8 years. And when we talk about central nervous system or cardiac tissue, cardiomyocytes, they are replaced in 100 years. So the damage for such tissues is then so more problematic. And especially it's a problem, let's say, in inner organs like lungs or liver, when you have an inflammation, and then this inflammation provokes the form of fibrous tissue. So it was logically that we used stem cell therapies in the beginning, historically more in hematology. This was so-called bone marrow transplantation. And first cell therapies, when we talk about it, is blood transfusion, which is known for decades and drastically changed the surgery and enables a lot of surgical procedure which otherwise wouldn't be possible. But later on, let's say the real stem cell or cell therapy started in 80s when the keratinocytes, it means the cells which are covering the main part of our epidermis were cultivated, and they were starting to use them to treat severe burns, and these patients which would normally die, they saved their lives and reduced their scars. Later on, the locomotor system, especially chondrocytes, they were replaced by the so-called cultivated chondrocytes or later stem cells in this process. And then, this started in 90s, and then 15 or 20 years ago, when several other applications also started. We realized that stem cells are they are present in our body all our life. If we lose our stem cells, we will die very soon. The thing is that they are also ethically controversial, especially when we were talking about so-called embryonic stem cells, because to get these cells, we have to destroy the blastocyst. And these cells these cells have normally a potential to develop in all 220 different types of cells in our body. And this, what we want to do is, in reality, we want to mimic or use the regenerative potential of the embryo, and we want to use the same processes when we are elder, and we would like to get low inflammation, and we want to have high regeneration. And this is one of the things which mesenchymal stem cells are really doing very well, which we then realized also in usage with directly regenerating tissues like bone or cartilage, and later on also for immunomodulation of the immune response, which was reducing inflammation. In reality, all these mechanisms are not known yet, but as Professor Lach mentioned before, here is a lot of research is necessary to support new therapies.
Thank you. Currently, there are no proven cures and no vaccines for COVID-19. So health systems and hospitals are left to treating patients One is with ventilation and trying to obviously to cure them with experimental treatment. If I can bring Dr. Curcio in for this part, because he is someone who is on, as we now hear, on the front lines, treating patients with COVID-19. What does it mean that we don't have, at least officially, we don't have a cure, and how, with experimental treatments, do you then approach the process of treating patients?
Well, actually, we have to say in the first place that we have difficulties in all the therapies for viruses. We have very few weapons against viruses. The best weapons we have are the vaccines, in fact, against viruses. Then we are developing a number of recent new approaches with chimeric and engineered molecules, which can help us with this in this fight. But of course, since this is a virus which has been very recently in touch with our human species, it's a battle that we are just starting right now. We are using, in fact, some of the antiviral drugs which have been developed in for other conditions, such as the antiretroviral monoclonal antibodies, which have been developed for the treatment of HIV. We are using drugs which are used in other viral diseases. And of course, in this case, sometimes they give us good results, but often case they don't. Just to follow up on the issue related to the cytokine storm, we are also using a drug which is directed against the receptor, one of the molecules that was discussed before, the interleukin-6 receptor. This drug is called tocilizumab, and in fact, that has given us some positive results just because it kind of modulates or stops in some patients, not in all the patients, of course, unfortunately, can reduce the cytokine storm, or at least the effects of the cytokine storm. We are also using a very old drug, which is hydroxychloroquine, which is a drug which was developed many years ago for the treatment of malaria. And we are also using other molecules which are available. Another very relevant issue, which again is related to the cytokine storm problem, is the use of anticoagulant. These patients, in fact, very often have a very diffuse production of microthrombotic reaction. And again, there are some trials which are ongoing that are addressing this issue using heparin and other anti-inflammatory drugs. What happens essentially is that you have a complete set of inflammatory reactions which are ongoing. And so we are also using anti-bradykinin drugs, which in some patients may have some advantage. But as Dr. Knežević was saying, the best possible option we have now, in fact, is represented by the stem cells, because stem cells are immunomodulators. They can actually modulate a lot of the activities that are important into the inflammation. And it's important to make a distinction between what is useful in regulating inflammation as opposed to just immunosuppressing, because we do not want to immunosuppress these patients. We want to modulate the inflammation, which is a completely different issue. And stem cells are very useful for that. We have a long experience with studying the immunosuppressive, or better, the immunoinflammatory function of the stem cells. And we have shown, for instance, that they produce a number of regulating microRNAs, which are useful in that respect. We have on the side, we have a long experience in collaborating with Dr. Knežević in using stem cells also in the therapy of osteoarthritis, which again is another inflammatory disease. And again, is another disease where the anti-interleukin-6 receptor drugs are used. So you see that there are similarities in this, and you see why stem cells hold so much promise in this treatment.
Thank you. If I could bring Professor Dr. Turnšek in for a follow-up on this. So what we heard just now, we do not want just to suppress the immune system. We need a modulating effect. We need to regulate it. Professor Doctor, if you can comment on this, because you mentioned before that what happens is initially you don't have a response, which is then followed by an excessive response by the immune system. Can you tell us more about this, and can you please tie it in with the effect of stem cells, how they modulate the response of the immune system?
Well, the fact that the interferon gamma activation is delayed is that the viruses produce inhibitors of interferon gamma. Here, there's also potential to treat these viruses infections, but on the other hand, as was already mentioned, immunomodulation, or better say anti-inflammatory modulation, anti-inflammatory activity of mesenchymal stem cells is important at the same time as their regeneration of injured lung tissue. So they do two things at a time. What actually you asked is that what do the mesenchymal stem cells do when they come into the site of this inflammation, into the epithelial cells? They attract, or other cells are attracted of immune cells. So these cells interact with each other, and they talk to each other. There's what we call a cellular crosstalk, and we don't know what they are talking to each other and how they would, what would be the final outcome of this talk. It can be that there will be a less of inflammation, or it would not be. So we don't understand that. And part of the project that we have proposed is that we would also study in vitro this crosstalk between mesenchymal stem cells, the COVID-infected cells, as well as all the immune cells that we know of are coming there, T lymphocytes, macrophages, monocytes, NK cells, natural killer cells, and so on. And how would we study that? We would put them together in vitro, and then we will see how they change phenotypically, what is the consequence of this crosstalk, get all their genes. So we'll do transcriptomic analysis. We will examine all the proteins that they are releasing into the medium, because they talk to each other by releasing molecules or by releasing extracellular vesicles. These are exosomes. And we will also analyze these exosomes that are going from one cell to another and are having these messengers of these words. We would understand their words, what they are talking, their language. And if we know their language, then we can interfere with this language. Then we can enhance this crosstalk so that we will reduce the inflammation and cure the patient. And that's the goal. So to interfere, and as was already mentioned, for example, interleukin-6 is one of these molecules, and anti-dots or anti-antagonists to this interleukin-6 are fine. But the thing is that there's not only one interleukin, there are many. And actually the beauty of these stem cells is that they do not act on one molecule, they act on many molecules. How they act exactly, we don't know yet. And this is also the research that we are proposing.
If I can bring you back into, Dr. Kučio, if I can bring you back into this debate, you are using stem cells as a way of treating COVID-19 patients as an experimental treatment. So far, there's already been a small study done in China involving 7 patients. Its results were published in Science, and they were the results showed some promise with the treatment, but of course the scope of the trial involving 7 patients is not sufficient to actually bring conclusive results. So Dr. Kučio, what are you seeing from your use of the stem cells? What can you say? How safe is the treatment? What are the results?
The treatment is safe also because the stem cells have been used not just to treat the patients in that trial in China, but stem cells have already been treated many times to treat different patients. And in fact, as I mentioned before, we have experience with Dr. Knežević just recently. We are working together in a project, in an Interreg project called ARTE, where we are using stem cells produced by Dr. Knežević to treat patients with osteoarthritis, and we have had excellent results in that in this study. As I mentioned, we are also trying to characterize the kind of response, and we have found that the stem cells produce microRNAs, which are non-coding RNA, which regulate the function of other cell types, just as was just now described. The microenvironment is very important. And what we are seeing is that basically the stem cells are able to modify the phenotype of a number of different cells important in the response. The macrophages, as was mentioned, can be shifted into a regulatory phenotype more than an aggressive phenotype. The T cells called helper T cells are down-regulated, and the suppressor T cells are up-regulated. And the NK cells, which also were mentioned just briefly before, are shifted into a regulatory phenotype more than a cytotoxic phenotype. So it's a variety of different ways that the stem cells use to regulate the inflammation. And this is very important because one thing that was also mentioned and that is very relevant is why some people develop very severe condition and other people don't. Don't forget that one very important difference between the various sets of patients are the age on the one hand, but also obesity, overweight on the other hand. We see that usually the most severe consequences are seen in elderly patients, often with diabetes, and diabetes is a very important predisponent disease in this case, not just because the amount of molecules of the receptor for the virus are increased in a diabetic patient, but because diabetic patients have an underlying already kind of active inflammatory response. Diabetes is typical to show an underlying reaction, phlogistic reaction, as well as obese young people. Obese young people also often case go into the most severe form of this disease, but obesity again is another condition that is also linked to inflammation. So everything seems to point out that the inflammation is a key issue in this disease. And again, this is certainly a very good reason to start using the stem cells. We have used stem cells in one patient just a few days ago. Cells were supplied by Educell, by Dr. Knežević. And of course, these are extreme treatments. In this case, we are approaching the case as a compassionate study in a patient which was in a very bad condition. Every other therapy had failed. So you can imagine that there were not so many hopes to actually save the patient. But what we have seen is that for some time after the injection of the cells, all of the inflammatory indices went down, which meant that the patient was actually responding, that the cells were actually doing their function in regulating the inflammation. So although, of course, the patient, we could not save the patient, but as I said, the condition of the patient were very bad. I mean, he had been under mechanical ventilation for 20 days, and no other therapy had any effect. The result that we had with this infusion of stem cells was already a very positive response. And we are planning to treat more patients with stem cells.
Dr. Knežević, we heard promising results in some patients. The from Dr. Curcio, also from the study in China. Can you explain what is the roadmap to getting a cure based on stem cell therapy out? Because these results are obviously in too small samples to provide conclusive results. So what would be the roadmap? What do you need to do to actually come up with a cure?
Yes, thank you very much for this also very positive comments. We were also very positively surprised, because normally, you know, there are no miracles in science, and you know, to accelerate false hopes is also not our intention. We want to really scientifically justify how this treatment can help, and what is the roadmap, as you mentioned. We are aware of these results Professor Curcio mentioned, and also we were quite positively surprised for this osteoarthritic study. So definitively we see that the effect of the mesenchymal stem cells or stromal cells, it depends how we call them, is there. So what is important is to find the right dosage, the right indication, who will respond and who probably won't. And what is very important is to have enough production of stem cells. So manufacturing the high quality product which can help and supply all those patients who need it, that's very important thing, you know. And stem cell therapy is, in one hand, is a personalized medicine therapy. On the other hand, like in these cases, it's a drug. It's called so-called advanced therapy medicinal products according to European legislation. And logically, clinical trials should be made to scientifically prove this method and then use it properly, because you have to know that this IRDS or cytokine storm, IRDS is acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is the result of the viral infection and also partially of the cytokine storm. These syndromes or these diseases are present also in other occasions, like in sepsis or in some other infections. And you have in Europe, you have around 300,000 such cases normally, let's say without COVID, and in US around 200,000. And the thing is that such a therapy can help these people too. But, you know, roadmap is, and that's why we were also joining together forces to get the proper help to the patients, and also to have a verified drug which can be used properly everywhere in the world.
So as you mentioned, you need to go through the process of clinical studies and then all the way down to confirming its effectiveness, the use of stem cells, their effectiveness in the treatment of patients. Can you tell us how long this process takes? And you obviously mentioned here the need for sufficient production of stem cells. What does that mean for the need to cooperate with other partners in this field?
Yes, so that's the main reason with our partnership also with our colleagues from US, Nantworks, which are producing equipment, and Viva Biocell from Italy, which are the producers of very good bioreactors which can accelerate scale up of this of these cells, and the company Stempeutics from India, who has also a long experience of high quality products supplying Indian market. And we know that jointly we can do something more to really solve the problem. So it means have enough cells cultivated in the standardized conditions. The cell supply should be standardized, and this should be used as a drug, and in the enough big quantities that you can really reply to the need which is on the market. Logically, this is not a tablet. This is not something which you can, let's say, have on your shelf and use it, like an antibiotic or like an aspirin. So you need a proper cell banking system. You need doctors who know how to use properly these cells, how to tow them, how to count them, when to use them, for which type of indication. So this is another type of medical intervention. And that's also something which we have to jointly develop, in one case with hospitals, because they have the need which we have to solve, then with manufacturers, and also with scientists who can solve the problems, like mechanisms of work, how to optimize or how make these drugs better, and time which is necessary. Is when you have so-called no war time. Now we are in the war, this we all know, war against virus. So that's why we also called our consortium fight against Corona. The thing is that in the normal peaceful time, you are, let's say, this process takes normally from idea to the market 15 years, and it costs few $1 billion. So just few big companies can really afford to finance, and you can not 100% sure that you will come till the end of the process to be on the market. So now when there is really a need, we don't have so much time. We know that for this pandemic, we can probably not do much for the big population, but we can learn and establish the weapons for the next outbreak, which will come definitively this on another way. But we have to be just better prepared. And that's exactly what we are doing now.
We heard the need, the importance of cooperation in this area, and so in the area of stem cells, to get a cure, or to get a cure produced. Maybe if I can bring Dr. Manohar in, we see pharmaceutical companies, even the biggest pharmaceutical companies, joining forces at the moment in, for example, in developing a vaccine. Just a couple of days ago, Sanofi and Glaxo announced they would work together to get a vaccine available once it is developed. Maybe if I can hear your side of what this cooperation between your companies, we heard this initiative, we heard this consortium fight against Corona that has been formed. Your company is part of it. How important is this cooperation, and how important is that you join forces?
We are very happy to join with our partners, Educell and other companies. We have been working in MSC, the mesenchymal stem cell area, a stromal area, for the last 15 years. We have done multiple clinical trials here in India, and we have treated more than about 350 patients in other indications like osteoarthritis, diabetic foot ulcer, and critical limb ischemia. So one is we have the experience of handling MSCs for the last 15 plus years. And we have the experience of manufacturing MSCs in a very large scale, because the need of the hour is how much we can produce, and ultimately how many patients we can supply and we can cure. So we have been using multiple technologies, as Dr. Mio was telling. So one is the 2D technology, and currently we have another technology, 3D, and to see whether we can complement each other in manufacturing and bringing high quality MSCs where the cell banks are checked at multiple levels. We have master cell bank, we have working cell bank, and ultimately the end product MSCs, which is going to the patient, should be of highest quality, should have good viability, and ultimately it should do the job what is required. So our goal is to supply the clinical grade MSCs to this consortium, and see that how we can support the European patients. Our product, which we have developed from India, Already we have gone to EMA, European Medicinal Agency. It has been designated as an ATMP, Advanced Therapy Medicinal Product. So we have some kind of a check in terms of the product what we have developed. And also the ARDS, the acute respiratory distress syndrome, is an urgent and unmet medical need. So we have the experience in handling the orphan drug and other things what is required by the regulators in Europe. So together we want to support the entire goal of treating this urgent need, unmet need of COVID-19 patients. And Dr. Mio, Dr. Kusio, Dr. Chla, they told what is the real issue. The issue is this viral pathogens can induce severe pulmonary inflammation. We talk about inflammation, and when the lungs becomes inflamed, they accumulate fluid, a process known as edema, and the lungs tissue becomes structurally abnormal. So how these MSCs, one is to reduce the inflammation, and second one is how it can shave the lung tissues. So we are talking about two things. So MSCs, as the other speakers has told, has got very strong anti-inflammatory properties, how we can reduce the inflammation and how we can improve the lung function. And we have multiple biomarkers, as told by the other speakers, immunomodulatory, anti-inflammatory, and even like angiopoietin-1 is another marker which can help in effectively reducing the alveolar inflammation and lung permeability. That means overall improve the lung function. So MSCs have got multiple functions, and it can address the inflammation, it can improve the lung function. One of the science part, when it comes to the commercial part and to supply the cells, we need a good technology, how we can do large scale upscaling, how we can produce billions of cells, how we can ship the cells in a cold chain from the manufacturing site to the hospital, and ultimately how these quality cells can be injected into the patients. Everything is very critical in order to achieve the end results. So with our experience, we want to support this consortium and see that how we can supply the clinical grade MSCs, which has crossed some critical milestones in Europe, and ultimately serve the urgent requirements of COVID-19.
On this point of cooperation, we heard before from Dr. Knežević, also involved in the consortium is a US company, Nanworks, which has been founded by internationally renowned entrepreneur and scientist Patrick Songchun. He's not joining us today in this debate from Los Angeles, but he has sent a short message, and I'd like to bring it in now.
Congratulations to Dr. Miomir Knežević and to Dr. Francesco Curcio for performing a historical treatment for patients suffering from the COVID, both in Serbia and Italy. This has been a historic day in which these patients could have a chance to recover from this horrific time of this pandemic, when sadly they enter into very critical conditions in the ICU on ventilatory support. These mesenchymal stem cells provide an opportunity to reduce the inflammation. These are amazing cells that come from the human body, either from the bone marrow or from fatty tissue, which we can convert by growing them. Over the past decade, Dr. Francesco Curcio and ourselves and our team have worked tirelessly to figure out and create, in a sense, a robot, a box we call NET-001. This is the first box of its kind in the world in which these cells, the bone marrow, can be installed, and through this robotic monitoring as a closed system, cells could grow without any human intervention, and within 7 days we end up with mesenchymal stem cells. I want to congratulate these two doctors who have now pioneered this in Europe, and we, under compassionate use, we are now applying to the United States for full IND and trying to use this now in our country. These cells that come from your human body are amazing in the sense that they have the capability of growing into what we call protective regenerative cells that can actually improve inflammation and even regenerate to create cells that will protect the body from, example, arthritis, in osteoarthritis. And when the immune system attacks the body, like graft versus host disease, it again has a potential. When you have a severe infection of your lung and you have a disease called ARDS, again, it's been used with potential. What was interesting in China, they used these cells for 6 patients, all of whom were able to recover from ICU. So there's hope then that these mesenchymal stem cells will be a wave of the future for many diseases that involve the immune system. And I want to send these words of indeed congratulations to these 2 doctors who have pioneered this in Europe.
So as we've heard, there's a whole chain in this consortium of producers of equipment, of producers of stem cells themselves, of those developing therapies, with the end goal being to find an effective treatment. One is obviously here, we're talking about COVID-19, but also for a whole series of other diseases. Now, if I can go back to you, Dr. Knežević, how long do you think is needed to actually come to a point where you would have a clinical study performed and you would be at and what other preconditions would you need to fulfill to get to a point where you would have a registered drug in the end?
This will depend also, highly depend also on reaction of the European Medicines Agency, if you are talking just about clinical trial in Europe. But as you heard, we have the same clinical trial, or the basis of this clinical trial is also performing now in US. So we want to coordinate these both things, and we know that now there is less administrative or even bureaucratic burden, which is slowing such processes, but you can still have to obey the basic rules of GCP, good clinical practice, because that's still that's in place, and this is for the safety of the patients and also for the safety of the science. So the thing is that it depends also how long the pandemic will last, because there will be more patients who will need this therapy, so we can do it faster. Follow-ups of such patients are normally lasting a few months. But what we plan, we want to, the most is seen in 1 month after application of the cells. And then you need some time to, let's say, to critically see the results. And then you can go to the next step. It means normally clinical trials, and that's why also we have a group which is specialized for clinical trials in our Fight Against Corona Consortium. And as you said, not to forget, we have also a group which is developing an antiviral drug and applying it. So we want to fight on both. It means we want to kill the virus, and we also want to save our wounded soldiers. I would say it means the patients who had this strong inflammation. So this we want to synchronize and also then have let's say a proposed therapy which can be ready, let's say in a year, that you can use it and be prepared, as we say, for the next round of therapy, that we know exactly when to intervene. That is, if the results will be, let's say, as we expected. But in science, you have, and in clinical trials, something can go, let's say, differently than you expect. But definitively we will have certain results and solutions also in autumn this year, because as we all know, this situation will last for at least a few months, and there will be patients who will come with these syndromes in the next months, definitively. And we are open for also for other countries. As we said, we are not, let's say, bound just for few hospitals. The only problem, not problem, but it's a challenge, is that we produce enough cells to supply all those who need to be treated, and logically then evaluate it in the correct way, so that we know that we learn something also from these cases.
Dr. Manohar, we heard before Dr. Kurcio saying we have very few weapons to tackle viruses. That this is one of our weaknesses. How important or how meaningful would a solution involving stem cells be? Because we heard the mechanism of reducing inflammation, of how the response of the immune response is regulated, modulated. How important would it be that we would actually come to a final drug using stem cells that would, in essence, provide a treatment for many viral infections?
As Dr. Miomir told, so the regulators around the world are working how we can fast track, how this drug, instead of going through the normal route of approval, how this medicine, because of the unmet need, because of the urgent need, how this medicine, if there is a good positive trend is there in the clinical outcomes, whether it can go to the market. So if we come to EMA, European Medicinal Agency, and if this is an urgent need, unmet medical need, and if we have a clinical trial which is showing some good positive outcomes, when I say positive outcomes, bringing the patients out of the ventilator as soon as possible, we call as a mechanical ventilator-free days, or the other one is how the mortality can be reduced. If we have good positive outcomes on the critical parameters, we can always go to the regulators and ask them to give a conditional approval that this drug is required for the patients, and we are seeing good positive outcomes, so that we can fast track and whether we can go to the market or can register our product, as Dr. Miomir said, in a period of about 12 months. So we need to work closely with the regulators to show that the science is strong, as you said, and there are multiple properties of MSCs which can be used for this. And if we have a good clinical outcome, then we can always go to the regulators to fast track and go to the market. It is happening in Japan, PMDA. They have a conditional approval. We have seen in US FDA, they have got an expanded access program where this medicine can go to the patient much faster. And in Israel, other companies are doing. So all the regulators are coming out with some fast track approval mechanism where this medicine, the mesenchymal stem cells, based on the positive outcomes, can go to the market much faster. So we feel that yes, we can give a solution or we can treat the patients, because we don't know how long this pandemic will last. And while the people are dying, can we save them from the death? So one is to use on a compassionate ground. While we are doing that, clinically, we want to show these MSCs are good and can be used as a standard of care as we go along.
Yeah, if I may add something to this, because this is really a crucial topic. See, first of all, we are not really sure how long the defense against this virus from the immune system will last. There are examples in which the immune response against viruses will last only a few months. There are some very famous immunologists who are saying that the immunity against this virus will last 8 to 10 months, and then we're probably going to see this virus again. So it is very important that we found a solution right now, because the virus is not going to go away. This virus is going to stay with us from now on. And as I mentioned, it may come back. Also consider that maybe other viruses coming. I mean, we have an example of another coronavirus that luckily is not as spread as this one, which is the virus which is inducing what is called MERS. And, you know, the lethality there is 60%. Again, for the same reasons, there is a huge inflammatory response, which is very, very dangerous. So the ability that we may bring to the table, the weapon that we may bring to the table with this stem cell approach is critical. It's critical because we are going to have something to do with this virus forever. We may encounter other viruses which might be worse than this. You know, after all, this virus is giving us variability in the lethality between 1 and 10%, depending on how you count the people with the disease and with not the disease, how you count the death and so on. But it's still relatively lower than it could be with another virus, which we may encounter in the future. So we have to be prepared, and some kind of an approach like the consortium that is presented is vital in the future, not just in the present, but in the future fight against this kind of disease.
I also agree with Dr. Kusio that MSCs have shown the safety. It is safe. I mean, it is shown in more than 5,000 patients, multiple clinical trials. So since it's a safe product, I think as Dr. Kusio has told, I mean, it has to go to the market. If there are some good positive outcomes, I think we can push the regulators that they can approve.
So working in the consortium are also national research institutions. Professor Dr. Turnšek, the National Institute of Biology is one of them. Can you explain the role of the national research institutions, and also if you tie in with what has just been said, you are now trying to you've registered the consortium, the project, basically New Horizon 2020. Innovative Medicines Initiative. What is the goal? How are you, with the help of the Horizon project, how are you looking to advance this cause?
Well, thank you for this question, because as Mio also mentioned, the research should go hand in hand with the clinical application. As we see cases and the clinical response, this is feedback to the researchers how to improve, or maybe also try to study possible side effects or non-effects. And on the one hand of the mesenchymal stem cells, on the other hand, we have to follow, as it was just said, the virus itself. So I would like to mention also that this virus has a huge genome. It's a really big virus. And usually these big genomes are not mutating so fast than the smaller ones. But this one is really mutating fast. So maybe we will see in a couple of months, or hope not, but a new mutant that would again act a bit different. And so that's why we are here having the infected cells at hand. And this is with the help of the Faculty of Medicine in Ljubljana, which is the Institute of Immunology and Microbiology, where they have these infected cells and models. And we can then study the new viruses as they come and see what their effect are. And then maybe we can then adjust the mesenchymal stem cells to modify them to respond to a novel situation with a novel type of virus. And that's why the really research at the molecular basis to understand what's going on and react fast on different situations is important. And also to understand why this immunity of the infected persons, why is this fading away? And this is, of course, a question that we do not know, and we do not know how to understand that. So it's a lot of unknowns still at the very, very basic molecular issues. And in Ljubljana, we have a lot of good institutions, also Faculty of Pharmacy that is also participating here, and other research institutes that are working on that, like Faculty of Chemistry and Institute of Chemistry. So we are well equipped, we have good tools to do research, and so we are ready and prepared for also applying for new projects and funds, because this is not really a cheap research. This is quite expensive research, and also we need expensive and experienced scientists that are really high qualified for that, so highly qualified for that. So yes, we need research, and this is becoming, with this disease, with this pandemic disease, really becoming important. The scientists are again in the highlights of the media, and I think the governments will recognize how important the science that is supporting this is, and allocate the funds for that. Europe already has.
As we heard, science is now in the driver's seat with this pandemic. And on that note, perhaps we can close our debate today. We can wrap it up with the question of, what is your message to the decision makers, to the politicians, and also to the public in this effort to find an effective cure, be it involving stem cells or otherwise? What is your message? Maybe I can go back to you, Professor Dr. Lach, Turnšek, and then also the other participants in a few words, please.
First part of the message was listen to the scientists, and I'm not the only person that said that recently. And second is that we can also look a bit broader. Why are we have the problem here? Why is the nature actually, which is already wounded by our climate injuries, climate changes? Maybe the nature is responding in this respect. And to combine these pandemic situations with the climate changes, this would be a next step perhaps to think about how to, in long term, prevent this kind of situations. Also, curing trying to really fight against climate changes at the same time.
Thank you. Dr. Manohar, your message?
There is a strong hope now that there is a solution available, or there is a likelihood of medicine available in the near future, and people can look for the novel therapy. And the clinical use of MSCs in COVID-19 ARDS patients could drastically impact the healthcare burden currently facing due to very large number of patients, limited equipment, and overworked medical staff. So I think there is a hope, and MSCs can support the patients, and we need to wait and watch.
Dr. Curcio, can we hear from you again? Your message to the policymakers, your message to the public in this time where we're facing a pandemic, an unprecedented pandemic for our generation.
Well, we've been, for a long time, we've been kind of in troubles because of bureaucracy. We've been in troubles because of low funding. We've been in troubles for all kinds of issues like that. So I would just say, well, help us to help you. Reduce burdens, increase funding, and you'll see that will be very useful.
Thank you. And Dr. Knežević, your message to the policymakers and obviously also to the public.
First of all, don't panic. Second thing, use this as a positive stimulation to change our behavior. Everybody, from the public to the politicians and to scientists too. And we have to be skeptic all the time, otherwise the science is dead. And we definitely need freedom in science, freedom in our heads, like art and science, these are bringing us a fight against such and similar, let's say, very problematic situations, which will definitively happen in future, definitely.
And on that note, we have exhausted our time for today. I think we've covered a wide range of topics. We've explored how stem cells can contribute to fighting inflammation processes that are also inherently part of the COVID-19 disease. Hopefully we have managed to answer some of the key questions of the potential of developing a cure that would involve stem cells for treating COVID-19 patients, and also for other diseases. And on that note, I'd like to thank our audience for watching us, and I wish you a great day.